Hello, happy summer solstice, this moment, the midnight. So welcome any and all. Going to read another chapter out of The Waking Dream, Unlocking the Symbolic Languages, or the Symbolic Language of Our Lives by Ray Grasse. It's not a big chapter. I thought it was a good one just to go for a little while at night. So chapter 9, we're getting into the astrological universe. Let me show you this cool picture. It's like a picture of the stars drawn out, though. It's cool. Okay, where is the screen? Boom, ba-doom, boom, boom. Focus. And what does it say? I can't tell quite. Maybe. Did it say Ptolemy? Ptolemus? Cool, right? Boop. That's good. So, Ptolemus Egyptus, or Egyptus, Ptolemus Egyptus. And there's another name up here that I can't barely read. Arctus Crux. I'm not sure. It's very tiny. So let's get into it. Chapter 9, the astrological universe. That the circuit of the stars indicates definite events to come, but without being the cause direct, as the general opinion holds, of all that happens, or can be proved by some modicum of argument. But the subject demands more precise and detailed investigation, for to take the one view rather than the other is of no small consequence. Plotinus, from Ennead 2.3 or 11.3, I think 2.3. Well, it looks like Roman 2s and then a 0.3. Plotinus. No, that says Ptolemy. Maybe it does say Plotinus. Anyways. All right. Of the many esoteric systems touched on in this book, perhaps none is as critical to a deeper understanding of the simplest imagination as astrology. Commonly seen as an arcane method of fortune-telling or simplistic sun sign psychologizing, astrology is the quintessential science of symbols, which in its broader outlines constitutes an archetypal language which can help us revision our lives. This chapter explores the problem which has long occupied the minds of astrology's proponents and critics: how astrology works. If there is a link between the position of the celestial bodies and the lives of humans, what is the nature of that connection? The answer to this question can help us understand the mechanism that underlies all of symbolist philosophy. Hey, good morning, Alex. Welcome. Happy summer solstice. Astrology, causal or acausal? Many theories have been proposed to explain the nature of astrological influence. In simplest terms, these fall into two groups: causal, or force explanations, and acausal, or synchronistic explanations. According to the causal school, human beings are influenced by the positions of the stars and planets at birth by means of an energy or force transmitted from celestial bodies to beings on Earth. Some link this energy to a force of nature already known, such as electromagnetism or gravity. For example, astrophysicist Percy Seymour writes of the complex way the solar system interacts with the Earth's geomagnetic fields. Quote, "The whole solar system is playing a symphony on the magnetic field of the Earth. We are all genetically tuned to receiving a different set of melodies from the symphony." End quote. Dude, I feel that. Still others believe this force consists of an energy in nature which science has not yet discovered, perhaps of a paranormal or occult nature, as was believed by such Renaissance magical philosophers as Cornelius Agrippa. However, both scientific and magical theories of this type hold that celestial forces act upon humans at the moment of birth by means of a classical cause and effect mechanism. The acausal or synchronistic explanation, on the other hand, suggests that the secret of astrological influence will never be found completely in mechanistic theories of cause and effect, but only in conjunction with a holistic worldview which sees all phenomena as embraced within a deeper network of interconnectedness. As esoteric writers like Dane Rudyard and H.P. Blavatsky have argued, the appearance of a particular planetary pattern in the sky at the moment of an individual's birth may not cause particular traits within the individual so much as arise in tandem with them. Blavatsky, for example, draws an analogy to an ancient Egyptian who yearly noticed the relationship between the flooding of the Nile and the rising of a certain star in the eastern sky. To the sophisticated Egyptian, it would have been apparent that the appearance of the star was not responsible for the flood, but merely coincided with it. In this same way, she argues, quote, the stars do not cause our good or bad luck, but simply indicate the same, end quote. The simultaneity, the simultaneity of tainity. I never saw it that way before. The simultaneity of earthly and heavenly events may be called, using Carl Jung's terminology, quote, a meaningful coincidence, end quote, with both the position of the planets and the life of the individual representing joint expressions of an underlying pattern of meaningfulness. Since the advent of the new physics, some esoteric writers have looked to Bell's theorem as contemporary support for the acausal explanation. Bell's theory holds that subatomic particles, once in contact, then separated, are able to communicate with one another instantaneously, in seeming defiance of both traditional physics and Einstein's postulate that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. The instantaneous connection of entities, regardless of distance, implied by Bell's theorem, is known as the principle of non-locality, end quote. To some minds, non-locality suggests a parallel with the astrological model, which also implies an instantaneous and non-causal relationship between entities, humans and celestial bodies. Despite considerable support from many of the astrological community, the acausal or synchronistic explanation for astrology can be shown to have serious limitations. To illustrate these, let us look at two arguments raised recently by critics of the synchronistic model of astrological influence. Bell's theorem has been used to support the argument that everything is instantaneously connected to everything else. But as Percy Seymour has pointed out, the theorem also states that the communication between particles is not weakened by distance. Two subatomic particles linked in the manner described by Bell will remain connected no matter how many light years distant they are. Applying this theory to astrology, it follows that stars and planets located at the far reaches of the galaxy should be as influential in human destiny as local planetary bodies. Yet astrologers have traditionally considered only the closest planets and stars in their circulations or in their calculations. As a result, it might be argued the synchronistic model cannot be used to explain the workings of astrology without accounting for the apparently localized, highly selective nature of the influences involved. Right? Flip this over. Boop. Okay. Yeah. The vastness. Whereas Seymour's objection to the synchronistic explanation of astrology centers around distance, a second objection concerns the problem of time. Consider the following example. Astronomers tell us that in AD 1054, a massive supernova appeared in the constellation of Taurus, now commonly referred to as the Crab Nebula nova. Over the years, astrologers have discussed the symbolic significance of the event in relation to events taking place during this period of history, such as the schism between the Roman and Byzantine empires in 1045 or 1054, or the rise of Norman power in England beginning with the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Moreover, the early 1050s are viewed by many scholars as the beginning of a major cultural blossoming which unfolded in Europe at this time and continued through the 12th century and included the building of the great cathedrals and the birth of modern individualism. The premise underlying such interpretations is that the Crab Nebula nova corresponded to personal and collective events on Earth by means of a meaningful simultaneity. I'm going to have to look up how to say that, rather than any mechanism of cause and effect. Simultaneity. I think that's it, but let's just double check. Ooh, it's a good stretch. I worked my arms really good today. Let's just go to a new tab. Simultaneity. Uh-oh. Balls. Simultaneity. Definition. And pronunciation. Man, okay, let's go to this.
Simultaneity.
Cool, thank you. Okay. Hey, Bamboo! Blessings to you, man. Great to see you, dude. Happy summer solstice, my friend. Happy summer solstice. Now to find where I was in this book. Simultaneity. So it was the last sentence, yeah. To personal and collective events on Earth by means of a meaningful simultaneity rather than any mechanism of cause and effect. The problem with this interpretation is that the supernova did not occur in 1054. Traveling at the speed of light from distant space, the image of this event became visible for Earth observers in 1054, though the actual explosion took place at least 6,000 years earlier. Thus, it hardly seems sensible to speak of effects related to this nova as synchronistic, or as due to a grand simultaneity or underlying wholeness. If this were the case, the effects would have been felt at the time of the explosion, not 6 millennia later. Rather, if the astrological influence of celestial events occurs primarily at the time of their visible appearances, as astrologers have almost universally contended, it suggests that the underlying process is delayed rather than simultaneous, the influence presumably traveling at the speed of light. Man, this is so fascinating. Those are great thoughts. In slightly different form, this example parallels a critique leveled at the synchronistic explanation of astrology that utilizes the research of Michael Gauquelin, 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 a controversial French statistician. Briefly summarized, Gauquelin was able to validate statistically one of the main principles of classical astrology, a connection between the births of prominent individuals and the appearance of certain planets as at key positions in the sky at the moment of the births. Gauquelin showed that more notable scientists were born while the planet Saturn was rising on the eastern horizon or positioned directly overhead than would be expected through chance alone. Somehow, the position of Saturn seems related to certain character traits or career predispositions, though precisely how this is possible was not readily apparent from Gauquelin's statistical research. This is so interesting. It's helping me see things in new lights. It's cool. But as Peter Roberts and Michael Harding have pointed out, it can take light from Saturn well over an hour to reach the Earth. Thus, the position of Saturn in the sky as viewed from Earth at any given moment is not where it actually is in space. Due to the rotation of the Earth, when we see Saturn on the horizon, it is some 20 degrees removed from that point. Or to couch the paradox in even more dramatic terms, were it possible to vaporize Saturn, observers on Earth would not see it disappear for an hour, and its astrological influence would presumably linger for that same period, even though the planet no longer existed. For the Gauquelin findings to be so consistently accurate suggests that it is the planet's perceived position rather than its actual position that determines its effect. Dude, thoughts. Thus, whatever the true nature of astrological influence, it seems to propagate at a specific velocity, presumably the speed of light, and is therefore not simultaneous nor synchronistic. These arguments against a synchronistic explanation of astrological influence are initially compelling. However, there is a different way of interpreting the problems they address. Approached metaphorically and philosophically, the line of reasoning sketched above does not so much overturn the synchronistic model as force us to reframe it. As an illustration of this alternative, consider the following non-astrological example of symbolic connection between distant events. Imagine a man living on an island far from his native country, with little or no access to modern telecommunications. Back home, his beloved sister has given birth to her first child, but due to the great distance separating the siblings, it takes a full month for news of the birth to reach the man by mail. Curiously, during the period immediately before and after the man's receiving the news, many events take place on the island which seem linked to the birth, such as a spectacular rainbow and a rare and beautiful bird building a nest outside his window. Most significantly, only minutes before the letter arrived, the man had decided to buy a boat and begin a new business venture. Thus, the news of his sister's giving birth seemed to the man an uncannily fitting symbol for the rebirth taking place in his own life at that time. In the minds of most symbolists, this confluence of events would qualify as synchronistic because the news of the birth did not cause the unusual circumstances in the man's life, but simply coincided with them. The problem, however, is the same we encountered with the example of the nova explosion. The sister's childbirth took place a month before the news arrived on the island, and thus a month before the corresponding changes in the man's life. Does this delay disprove the synchronistic relationship between the childbirth and the events of the man's life? Not necessarily. It depends on what one is choosing to synchronize. In this case, a perfect symbolic synchronicity exists between the news of the childbirth and the events in the brother's life, rather than between the events and the birth itself. The problem may thus lie in defining synchronicity strictly in terms of instantaneous connectedness. In fact, as theorists like Paul Kramer have noted, and as even Jung himself was forced to admit, Events which are not simultaneous may, at times, be linked in a significant fashion. This possibility suggests a distinction between what might be called simultaneous and sequential acausality. Simultaneous acausality is any meaningful, non-causal connection between events occurring at the same moment in time, such as a person coming across a photo of a childhood friend precisely at the moment the friend calls on the phone. By contrast, sequential acausality is any meaningful non-causal connection between events taking place consecutively, such as the number 58 coming up several times during the same day. Applying this distinction to astrology, the 6,000-year delay between the Crab Nebula explosion and its influence on Earth in 1054 does not necessarily negate a synchronistic connection. The configuration of events in medieval Europe could be viewed as synchronistic with the news of the nova by means of simultaneous acausality, and synchronistic with the nova itself, despite the time delay, by means of sequential acausality. That got a little fuzzy for me. Light and consciousness. To take this argument a step further, let us consider the possibility that people are connected synchronistically, with phenomena taking place around them in several ways at once. Most astrologers hold as meaningful the dates on which celestial events are seen from Earth, rather than the dates on which the events actually occurred. This belief is borne out by the research of Michael Gauquelin, which demonstrates statistically that it is the position of celestial bodies as they appear in the sky rather than their actual position that correlates to their influence on earthbound observers. However, it is possible that both positions are meaningful, and that an astronomical event influences beings on Earth both when it actually occurs and when it is perceived. In the case of the Crab Nebula nova, for example, its effects could have been experienced both simultaneous to the nova as well as 6,000 years later, when its light and energy reached Earth, but on different levels of the collective consciousness. Astrology itself suggests this interpretation. Most astrologers believe a celestial body's proximity to a degree of visibility on Earth correspond symbolically to its position in the minds of observers. Thus, more visible bodies like the Sun or Venus represent forces closer to the surface ego consciousness, while more distant planets like Neptune or Pluto, both of which are invisible to the naked eye, represent relatively unconscious forces to the personal or collective psyche. The discovery of previously unknown planets is seen as corresponding to the surfacing of latent forces into active consciousness. In short, more visible celestial bodies represent psychic forces of which people are more aware, while more distant and less visible bodies correspond to forces more recessed in consciousness. Wow. Hey, Kelly, welcome in. Happy summer solstice. Thus, the Crab Nebula explosion could have been experienced by beings on Earth instantaneously, but on a subliminal or unconscious level. The arrival of its light on Earth 6,000 years later would correspond to the emergence into consciousness of previously latent effects. Ooh, juicy. It is ironic that from the standpoint of light itself, the distinction between these dual perspectives does not even exist. According to Einstein's theories, time is relative. It slows down as a body moves closer to the speed of light. Thus, as seen from the perspective of a photon traveling from the Crab Nebula nova to Earth, there would be no delay whatsoever between the moment of departure and that of arrival. From light's perspective, both events would take place in an eternal now, symbolically, the viewpoint of enlightened, transcendental awareness. There's a little diagram here. There's a distant event, observer A and observer B, and there's arrows going from the distant event to both observer A and B, which creates a tall triangle on the base here. let me just flash what I'm saying first here so that I can read about it, and then I'll show it to you up close. The top level, the universe as perceived at the level of the conscious finite ego, characterized by separateness, causality, and time delay in information transfer. Bottom level, the universe as perceived at the level of deep unconscious or divine mind, characterized by simultaneity, acausality, and absolute interconnectedness. Ooh, let me show this to you. That's cool. Oh, hey, that's what I meant. Here we go. Boop. Okay. A relativity theory of astrological influence. Yeah, relativity. That is what it says. We can conclude from these examples that any model of astrological influence must take the subjective perspective of individual human beings into account. Given the way astrology has been practiced, this conclusion is not surprising. Even after Copernicus demonstrated that the sun was the center of the solar system, astrologers have cast horoscopes using the Earth as the center of the universe, calculating the positions of the planets as they appear to an observer on Earth. Is this practice due to an error of thinking based in tradition? I would say no, for while the heliocentric view may be true objectively, from the experiential or phenomenological perspective of earth-bound observers, the Earth is the center of the visible universe. Thus, while it might be demonstrated scientifically that a given planet appearing on the horizon at the moment of a child's birth might not actually be in that position, or might have been vaporized into dust, the phenomenological reality of the planet is precisely where one perceives it to be. The role of the relativity principle in astrology can be likened to the impact of Einstein's theory of relativity on conventional physics. In pre 20th century science, it was thought that human beings might someday come to understand the laws of nature as they exist in an absolute sense, independent of individual observers and their subjective viewpoints. However, Einstein demonstrated that the vantage point of an observer radically affects the characteristics of the universe being perceived, so that a person traveling near the speed of light would perceive an essentially different universe from that perceived by a person at rest. Thus, after Einstein, science was no longer just a matter of discovering objective universal laws, but of calculating the role perspective plays in determining how a profoundly relative universe acts or appears. Hey, Mr. Hugh, AF, welcome in. Happy summer solstice, everyone. So cool. Can you believe we're halfway through the year, basically? It's wild. 2022, the year of self-love. And maybe just love in general. So much love. A similar problem has plagued esotericists who have for centuries searched for an objective law of nature that might explain the workings of astrology and other systems of influence or interconnectedness. This presumption has traditionally led esoteric theorists to postulate subtle energies and correspondences in the outside world, as if these principles might somehow operate independent of human observers. Yet all such searches for a universal and objective explanation for astrology have been at best incomplete. Astrology is a human art, and is a human part and it is human participation in the play of objective cosmic forces that underlies its unique power. The phenomenology of human experience and the human perspective of observing the heavens with our feet firmly planted on the earth underlies astrological thinking and analysis. Like the post-Einsteinian scientific universe, the universe of astrologers is profoundly relative. Spirit and soul, a transpersonal perspective. It may be true, as esotericists have long believed, that at deeper levels, people are linked to each other and to the various phenomena of the world in an instantaneous and non-causal fashion. However, from the viewpoint of the individual, finite human ego, the world is characterized by separateness, time delay, and subjectivity, all of which combine to produce a distorted view of reality. Yet such a subjective view, however mistaken, might in a deeper sense be exactly right. From a symbolist perspective, one could argue that the distorted worldview of a given individual is exactly appropriate symbolically to his or her level of consciousness. Boom. Yeah. Let us recall here the traditional distinction suggested in many esoteric systems between spirit and soul. Esotericists have described spirit as the essential ground of being for each individual, characterized by non-duality, timelessness, and absolute interrelatedness. Soul, by contrast, is the more personal aspect of an individual nature, closer to the ordinary ego and more associated with the emotions. The soul also contains the imprints of individual memories and thoughts. While people may share a certain commonality of nature at the level of spirit or divine mind, at the level of soul or personality, each individual enjoys a distinct admixture of personal and archetypal elements. This guy's a great writer, right? It's so good. These differences are reflected in the subjective vantage point represented by the horoscope, which charts the position of the planets and stars relative to the time and place of a specific person's birth. The cosmos and its various planets, stars, and galaxies may be objectively the same for all humans, but each human is at a particular and individual stage of soul development. Thus, each individual's horoscope must be relative and subjective, and the astrological symbolism revealed by a person's chart is unique for that soul. Astrology and participatory meaning. All this suggests that the dimension of meaning in any astrological interpretation is neither entirely subjective, as the modern scientific viewpoint would argue, nor entirely objective, as many classical astrologers have argued. Rather, astrological meaning is a symbolic fusion of both dimensions. An example from my own experience may help illustrate this point. Jenny, welcome in. Happy solstice. Welcome. Now, the question raised by my experience is this. Was this image of a five-pointed star actually out there in the night sky, or was it purely a subjective impression? Five-pointed stars are widely recognized as universal symbols. I actually saw such an image and could have photographed it if I had wanted to. Yet the appearance of this star was dependent on my location at a precise moment. Had I moved a city block in either direction, my perspective would have shifted sufficiently to eliminate the star. Clearly, the image I saw could be characterized as both an objective and a subjective event. Objective to the extent it was a genuinely perceived external symbol, yet subjective in that it existed only from my vantage point at a particular moment. This principle helps us to understand many key elements of astrological theory besides those already mentioned here. Take, for example, the role of the constellations in sidereal astrology. Purely objective explanations of astrological influence see the constellations as representing actual force fields or patterns of energy located out in space, which radiate their energies toward beings on Earth. However, if one were to travel by spaceship to the point in the night sky where the astrologically meaningful constellation, such as Aquarius or Pisces, exists, one would not find the particular patterns we call by these names, since most constellations are made up of stars widely scattered in space, which only assume the appearance of being linked when seen from the vantage point of Earth. Even in cases where the stars of a constellation may be physically close to one another, the shape they form relative to each other is likely to be completely different when viewed from a point beyond our solar system. Does this mean that constellations and star patterns do not really exist, or that they do not carry experientially verifiable meaning? By no means. Rather, the star patterns linked to astrological interpretations are both objective and subjective in nature. In other words, like the five-pointed star I saw, the constellations express genuine archetypal patterns which arise in conjunction with subjective frameworks and perspective and interpretation. Such substantial entities as the planet Jupiter or the Crab Nebula Nova do, of course, possess an objective external reality, but any meaning assigned to these cosmic influences will always in some way be modified and contextualized by the subjective perspectives of finite observers. Dude, dang, this is good. This discussion has important implications for understanding symbolist philosophy as a whole. The life events which we have been examining for their symbolic and synchronistic dimensions also have both objective and subjective or relative dimensions. For instance, for many people, a temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit might seem warm in spring, yet chilly in fall. Similarly, a small apartment might be viewed quite differently by two individuals from dissimilar backgrounds. A woman who lived previously in a mansion might find a three-room apartment claustrophobically small, while a man who grew up sharing a small rural cabin with a family of 8 might regard the same 3 rooms as the embodiment of spacious freedom. Likewise, someone witnessing a shooting star from one part of the country may perceive it as moving from right to left, whereas a person in a different state sees it moving from left to right. Ha ha ha! Pearl, welcome in, Delaney. Good to see you. Happy summer solstice. Welcome. Thus, the signs and symbols presented to us by the events of our daily lives may be thought of as objective events with a unique meaning of their own. Oh, excuse me. As personal symbols, however, their meaning results from a combination of subjective and objective elements, as modified by the unique perspective of each individual. The reality of this world is therefore one in which universal archetypal symbols express themselves through the transitory forms of ordinary experience, just as the eternal mathematical concept of 2/3 can find expression through a 9-gallon clay jug holding only 6 gallons of water. From this, we may further conclude that all meaning is a product of dualistic experience, requiring an observer and an observed, a subject and an object. Only in the transcendent state beyond duality, such as mystics postulate, is experience during enlightenment does meaning, and by extension, symbols, archetypes, and synchronicities cease to exist. In a state of pure being, we move beyond all conceptual knowing or inflection. Wow. Astrological influence, a symbolist interpretation. In light of this discussion, we turn again to the question of the mechanism underlying astrology. We have seen that astrological influence is based neither on a purely mechanical model of cause and effect, nor on any sort of universal instantaneous interconnectedness, such as Bell's theorem seems to imply. Ooh, I gotta cough 1 sec here. However, we have also seen that astrological influence is synchronistic, but in a very sophisticated way. The mechanism of astrology, like the other esoteric systems we have been examining, is symbolism, through which intrinsically meaningful, objective events are invested with layers of additional subjective meaning by means of their relationship to the perspectives of earthbound observers. As we survey the techniques and theories of traditional astrology, we discover that the vast majority of these are purely symbolic in character, with little or no basis in empirical reality. As one example of this, let us consider the phenomena described in astrological circles as Mercury retrograde. Mercury is said to be a retrograde when its skyward path relative to the Earth seems to reverse direction. In actuality, of course, Mercury is traveling in its orbit around the Sun. Of course. Just as the Earth is. However, in the same way that a train overtaken by a faster one will appear to be moving backwards, then in fact it is still moving forward along its own path at a steady rate of speed. The reversal of Mercury is a perceptual illusion caused by the position of Mercury in its orbit relative to the Earth's longer and slower orbital path. I feel like showing a picture, actually, of the orbits of the planets from Ptolemy's view. I think, is it Ptolemy? Let me see if I can find it to show you. Excuse me. Pictures. I bet it's in this one. Balls. I don't see it. Balls. Oh, hey, here it is. Okay, I'm gonna open you up. Okay, it's a little distorted because I blew it up so much. Oh, it is Ptolemy's model of the universe. And okay, let's share screen. Share screen. Window. This one. Share. Boom. Look at that. It's like a spirograph. So every one of these little loop-de-loops right here. Boop, loop there, loop-de, a loop-de, all of these loops. Okay, so this is Saturn. And this is Saturn's path, okay? And whenever it's doing this little loop-de right here, that's when it's retrograde. This one that's real close, that's Mercury. That's why we have 5 of these, right? Or what is it? I don't know, 2 or 3 a year. I think there's 3 or 4. Actually, maybe there's 4 a year. We just finished one and we have 1 or 2 more coming. But yeah, fascinating, right? Damn. I think so. I'll leave that up for a bit while I read. When Mercury's skyward path seems to reverse for several weeks at a time, business contracts run into complications, communications break down, and technical difficulties abound. In all fairness, many astrologers allow for the possibility of more positive effects to accompany these same periods in the charts of individuals, though these are generally interpreted as occurring on more psychological and spiritual levels. Though the effects of a Mercury retrograde are observable and are borne out by personal experience, the cause and effect model cannot logically account for them. Clearly, it is nonsensical to postulate any backing up rays or emanations coming from the planet itself, since the retrograde phenomena has nothing to do with the objective status of Mercury. Rather, the communications problem and other effects associated with the reversal of Mercury might more effectively be understood as a metaphor for conditions taking place for humans and existing only in relation to the phenomenological dynamics of observers on Earth. Also, there's always a balance, right? So, I mean, all of these planets even have a one way or the we're always going through different cycles, and so opportunities for learning that way. Welcome in, happy summer solstice. Astrology, then, as Shelley Trimmer has suggested, might be defined as astronomy symbolically interpreted. Astrology uses the same essential facts as astronomy, but infuses them with a symbolic or qualitative dimension absent for the conventional scientist. As seen by astronomers, Jupiter, bringer of jollity, is a large gaseous planet traveling at a particular speed exhibiting certain magnetic and gravitational characteristics. For astrologers, however, Jupiter symbolizes a particular set of qualities: expansiveness, joviality, excess, spiritual learning. This interpretation cannot be apprehended through experimental scientific means. If one were to travel to Jupiter and take samples of its gases or measure its field energies, one would still not be able to isolate the symbolic meaning associated with the planet by astrologers. Astrological interpretation requires a perceptual shift. I'm going to take this down now, even though that's really cool, right? Oh, yeah. Loving is what I got. I said, remember that. Loving is what I got. I don't cry when my dog runs away. I don't get angry at the bills I had to pay. Okay. Moreover, the worldview underlying astrology sees not only the planets, but all of reality as symbolic in nature. To the symbolist, the heavenly bodies are threads within a great tapestry of affinities and correspondences. Thus, when a child is born, the symbolist can find important clues pointing toward the child's character and destiny everywhere. In the flight of birds, in movement of clouds, and other natural signs and omens, in coincidences and events in the lives of the parents and their community, in political and social happenings, as well as in the position of the stars and planets in relation to the time and place of the birth. The mystical Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus, who is frequently cited as being critical of astrology, echoes this understanding. In Ennead, man, let's learn how to say that word. Ennead. I come across it often. Ennead. All right. Oops. I didn't know. Ennead. Okay. I love yous. In Ennead, the second, 3, his primary essay on this subject, Plotinus criticizes the simplistic understanding of astrological mechanism, which holds that the stars cause things to happen on Earth. Rather, Plotinus argues astrological influence is based on a philosophy of cosmic unity. Wait, Ennead. We could read it right now, but we're not going to. It's 12:49. Yeah, we're just going to read these 10 pages of this chapter. Since all things emanate from the one, the divine source, all things are intricately coordinated or enchained with one another and are therefore signifiers of each other within a supremely regulated design. the stars no less so than birds or any other phenomena. Quote, the wise man is the man who in any one thing can read another, end quote, Plotinus wrote. In other words, the stars and planets are meaningful just as every other object and event is meaningful, as all things are equally enchained and significant within the universal order. As Plotinus remarks elsewhere, one would have to be far removed from the awareness of divine unity to think that anything is truly accidental or the result of chance. We're so blessed. Given this philosophical framework, questions of mechanism seem inappropriate. Does a native shaman who names a child Swift Eagle because of the great bird which circled the village during the birth ask which manner of force emanated from the eagle toward the child that influenced its personality, biology, and destiny? Or by what means this force is transmitted, or its precise speed? Does it matter whether the influence of the eagle traveled at the speed of light, or, in the case of a child born to the sound of thunder, the speed of sound? More useful than such inquiries is an appreciation of the wonder of a universe in which such synchronicities occur, and in which meaning expresses itself in such manifold and multidimensional ways, through not only planets and people, but animals, weather, colors, landscapes, in short, every perceivable thing, large and small. As Plotinus wrote, all things must be enchained, and the symphony and correspondence obtaining in any one organism is entwined with that of the all. End quote. Thus, asking what influence the planets have on human beings reflects a misconception, because the planets themselves are elements of a much larger picture in which each part interlocks with the other in a mutually arising symphony of meaning. One final astrology may make point. Oh, nope. I see. That doesn't say astrology at all. Okay. One final analogy may make the point. Let us imagine a play in which the lead character comes near the end of a drama to understand the truth he has long hidden from himself. As the playwright has written the scene, at the moment of this breakthrough, the audience sees the sun rising through the window at the back of the set, a dramatic device complementing the change of perception experienced by the character. Now, how should we understand the relationship between the sunrise and the psychological change of character? There are secret rays emanating from the mock sun to the character, such as a scientist. Or wait, this is a question. Are there secret rays emanating from the mock sun to the character, such as a scientist could measure? Is there an energy field set up among the characters acting on stage, or among the objects and props which make up the stage setting? Clearly there is not. Nonetheless, there is a connection between the character's psychological shift and the lighting change, a connection that is reflected in the emotions of the actors on stage and in those of the audience watching the scene. But the connection is symbolic rather than causal. Each element unfolds within a larger framework of meaning and is interpretable only in relation to a transcendent ground of reference, the dramatic design conceived in the mind of the playwright. Dude, this is well written. This is good. It's like, thank you. It's like making all these awesome points. Here, as in astrology, meaning exists only through a particular perspective of symbolic interpretation. Each person's experience is a unique and highly personalized context of meaning. The seemingly unrelated events of a life, which include, among other factors, the positions of the constellations and planets in the sky, can be understood as mutually arising elements in a greater field of significance. The archetypal script of a life and consciousness, which is reflected in the natal horoscope. Moreover, the personal context of meaning of any set of circumstances is unique to each individual perspective. As we have seen, the objective position of any heavenly body is less significant in some respects than its perceived position, or even whether the body exists at all. Yet, for all of its subjectivity, each life drama is perfectly suited to the context of meaning for a specific individual at a specific moment, however inaccurate it may appear from a more objective vantage point. Like solar systems, in a stately procession of spiral rings around a vast galaxy, so all personal dreams are all personal dreams are nested within greater dreams. Broader contexts of meaning, each level providing a deeper and broader perspective on the meaning of the personal dream, like Ezekiel's wheel within wheels. The symbolist universe is a vast web of ascending hierarchies, each increasingly objective vantage point, yielding a more complex worldview, which is apt and true for that level. Quote, a subtle chain of countless rings, end quote, wrote Emerson. Quote, the next unto the farthest brings, end quote. It brings ... end quote. In the end, mystics proclaim all personal dramas converge on an ultimate hub of meaningfulness called God, the Tao, the cosmic dreamer, Brahma, the absolute, the ground of being. At this still center point, the great consciousness holds all the balance. As Schopenhauer wrote, quote, it is a vast dream, dreamed by a single being, but in such a way that all the dream characters dream too. Hence, everything interlocks and harmonizes with everything else, end quote. With a little 11 by it again. Now that we have some notion of how astrology works, we turn to a closer look at its symbols and their interpretation. Astrology, we discover, is a veritable Rosetta Stone of symbolic meaning, with rich and meaningful interconnections with other esoteric and symbolic systems. Badass! And that was the chapter. We did it, everyone. Little Wink, good morning. Happy summer solstice. Oh my goodness. That is wonderful. Oh my gosh. So yeah, I am going to call it because I'm going on the 1 a.m. here. I'm going to get myself some sleep. I am really pumped to get into this next section. I think I'm going to do it before I go live with Dean and Genevieve tomorrow. But hey, I'll plug that real quick just because I'm really looking forward to it. You all are welcome to be there. No pressure, whatever you're getting into, but you're welcome to come. We're going to be doing some free solstice soul shine readings, energy check-ins. Yeah, so bring your questions and your energy. I love yous. I will see you tomorrow. And whatever you get into next, I hope it goes well for you. Thank you so much. Mwah. I'll talk to you soon. Happy solstice!